Today we're going to build the second half of our spring project. Last time we built the end, the resolve. This time we're going to build the front and use the resolve composition as a layer inside of our compilation composition, which is spring build. Here I'm showing you the final product to give you an idea of the number of layers and the keyframes and what happens. The bee moves with the flower, swings on down, lands with the word spring, and then flies off. So that's what we're going to make today. Let's get to that point. And you can go back and forth between After Effects and the video. Let's make a new composition. New composition, Command N. I'm going to call this spring build. And NTSC DV, the same resolution as our resolve. And this time, let's make it 10 seconds. So everything else is default 720 by 480. And let's say OK. So now let's bring in what we need to use. Let's go File, Import. And this time, let's use multiple files. And we're actually going to import in 2 batches because we want 2 different kinds of uses for the files that we bring in. First one we're going to bring in, let's select vertical CU flower 2x, which means in my shorthand, vertical close-up flower at half the speed. Basically, it's slowed down 2 times, it's 200% speed. We need mid-shot branches, import as footage. Because I said file import multiple files, this window stays open and I can import btop. But this time, instead of footage, I would like to import it as composition retain layer sizes. Retain layer sizes makes each layer inside the composition the size of the layer. And this is a Photoshop file, and my layers in Photoshop will be imported as named layers in After Effects. I'm going to open. It's going to ask me, are you sure? It says composition retain layer sizes. Yes, that is correct. Editable. Yes, I want to be able to edit it. It's going to give me another chance to import something new. I'm going to say cancel. So that was import multiple files. It lets you import different kinds of files. So let's start with vertical close-up. I'm going to snap it into my composition on the left side. You can turn on title action safe, and I use it because it gives me an idea of where center is, vertical, horizontal, and stage center. Let's see what this footage is. I don't know if you remember my preview that I just showed you. The bee is going to fly in, move with the flower, and then go on its big circle. For the bee to move with the flower, I have to do some motion tracking, which is a good review for us. We did that in the first video. So I'm going to pull out my tracker, window tracker. Remember, tracker is a menu that I like to have undocked by itself. So I like to have it open because it is easy for it to be partially open and you miss some of the options. I always make sure it's all the way open. And then with this layer selected, you can say track motion. And if you remember how to do it from last time, you can pause this video and challenge yourself. See if you remember how to do this. In review, we can look at this reminder that the tracker has 3 main features. The middle cross, attach point. That's the point that you're actually tracking, the target. And then there's a feature region, which is this inner square. Remember, you can search under RGB, luminance, or saturation. And then the search region is the region where it looks as the footage is moving. So here we are. We have our track point that we're working with. When you click and drag, it can be tricky because if you grab another part of the tracker, you might resize it instead of moving it. So usually I want to click inside the feature region, and then it gives me this magnified look. I'm going to pick a dark area because I'm going to track by luminance. And let's see, let's edit the target. Let's say options. You can track according to RGB, red, green, blue, hue, basically, luminance or saturation. Now I'm going to say analyze forward. If a tracker moves with your track point, that's usually a good sign. So you see this kind of cascade of points. That usually means that your tracker worked. So let's take a look. We see if I open up motion trackers, you see tracker 1 and the track point that we track. So this bottom bar we've used before. This is the work area bar. Up here is the zoom bar. And if you see this vertical line, it's the location of our timeline marker relative to the area of zoom. So this is actually very helpful. And you see as I zoom in to my timeline, I start to be able to see the individual keyframes that we can't see when we're zoomed all the way out. So that was a lot of keyframes generated. We need to be in our layer to use the tracker. But now that we're done with the tracker, let me go back to our composition, and it looks exactly the same, but we do have these track points now. So I'm going to bring in my B. One thing I should point out is that we imported the B as a composition. If I double click on the composition, you see that it comes in 2 layers because there were 2 layers in the Photoshop file. I can turn these, toggle these on and off, and this is the layer, the one that says background copy, is the layer with the B. Instead of importing the whole composition, so every time you import a Photoshop file or an Illustrator file with layers, you get a composition with the layers of the Photoshop file as layers in After Effects. You also get a folder with the layers. This folder is very helpful because I can just grab these elements and put them in my composition. I'm going to grab my B, and I can either put it here, you see it gives me the plus sign and I'm adding a layer, or I can put it here and add it, put it right where I want it. Now I'm going to zoom in, and you can zoom in by saying Command plus, right, to zoom in, Command minus to zoom out. I'm going to do a couple things to this B. I'm going to use the pan behind tool, which is also known as the anchor point tool. See, the anchor point of the B is on the middle of his back, which is the center of the layer. I'm going to put it up a little bit because it kind of makes sense to me that it moves more from the forelegs and the wings. So I'm going to move my anchor point up a little bit. So you see how the anchor point is here. With the anchor point here, I'm going to hit R for rotation with my layer selected. You see how that's where the B rotates. That seems a little clunky. So I'm going to use my pan behind or anchor point tool to move it a little forward, maybe in between the forelegs, and that seems more nimble to me. I adjusted my anchor point on my B. I'm going to select the layer again and hit the S key, and the S brings up scale, and I'm going to make him just a little smaller. I'm going to zoom out to check my scale relative to the frame. I don't want the B to be hard to see, but I don't want it to be too large either. Now I'm going to transfer my motion. Remember we did this in the first video, and this is a good review. I'm going to transfer the motion from my flower to my B. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool. I'm going to position my B where I want it. And then with this layer selected, I can go back to my tracker, and I need to define the motion source. It's going to be the vertical flower. I'm going to edit the target. There's only one choice right now, the B. And let's see what else we can do. This is the same. I am going to apply both X and Y. You see the B had a tiny shift. That means that it's adjusting. When I play it now with the flower, we can open up this layer and let's zoom in. We do want the B to fly in. I'm going to give it a couple frames, maybe 6 frames. I'm going to delete the position keyframes. Hang on. I'm going to put a rotation keyframe so it ends up facing this way. But of course, I want it to face this way as it flies in. So I'm working backwards. and my B, I'm going to pull my B out. It's easy to accidentally select one of those position keyframes, so you have to try to click on the B on a place that is not position keyframe that's already made. Once you activate the stopwatch for a layer and or create a keyframe for a layer, from then on, every time you change that variable, a keyframe will be created. So my B comes in. Let's see, I'm going to make it fit to see if you can see what's happening with the bee. The bee flies in and then flips around. And I would like to make that a little smoother. So I'm going to change these keyframes from linear to Bezier. What's happening is that the change is happening in one keyframe, which makes it very sudden. I would like the change to happen over several keyframes. I'm going to choose animation, keyframe interpolation, and right now the interpolation is linear, just like angles and curves in Illustrator, right? You have linear and Bezier in After Effects. So I'm going to change these to Bezier. Let's try actually continuous Bezier because it calculates over a number of keyframes then. And look that my keyframes changed their shape, actual icon changed. Another thing I can do is move this farther away. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Now we have a turn. Adjust it a little more. I think that's better. It's not a flip. There's at least a frame or two of curve, so that's much better. So I did that with changing the keyframe interpolation. Now is probably a good time to save. What do we need next? We need to give the bee a place to go. So if you remember in our final product, this is a video that I made during another demonstration, so there's some slight differences. But remember, the bee rides the flower. Another piece of footage wipes on and kind of carries the bee along with it in a wipe. And then our resolve comes in. The bee rides the flower and moves out. This is footage of a finished one that I did probably a few semesters ago, but I just wanted to show you so we know where we're going. So the end of the motion, the end of the footage, the vertical close-up flower footage, is 227, and that's when the position keyframes end, so we should leave before then. If we want to transition in 1 second, let's go to 127, enter. So I clicked on the timecode field to activate it, and then I typed in 127, enter. Let's bring in our mid shot, the footage that we want to bring in. Oh, this is another good review. Remember, we had this footage composition size discrepancy. Oh, I have to have the footage selected. With the footage selected, let's go File, Interpret Footage Main, and it's a discrepancy with the pixel aspect ratio. So I'm going to change that to square pixels. Let's see if I'm not covering it. We can see what happened. You see how there's this gap here. I'm going to say square pixels, and because I have preview on, we can see that the footage became the right size. So this is before and this is after, and I didn't do it with scale, I did it with pixel aspect ratio. Now our mid-shot footage fits. We are at 127. I'm going to animate a mask to make it look like the footage is wiping in. I'm going to select the rectangle tool. When you have a layer selected and you create a vector object, it creates a mask. So you see how by dragging the mouse with the rectangle tool, I can control what part of the image is opaque, what part of the image shows, and what part is transparent. I'm going to start it a little lower than horizontal center and just off stage. This is where the mask shape will start, and I'm going to make a keyframe in mask path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my timeline marker. If I want the transition to be 1 second, I can say plus 100, enter, or return. It jumps to 227. Click on the top right corner, hold down the shift key, click on the bottom right corner, and I can, with both of those points selected, I can hold down the Shift key again and constrain to one axis and pull out my mask. And you see how a second keyframe was created. And between those two keyframes, I start here and I end